58,000. Take just a second to let that number really sink in. It's not just a random statistic, and it's certainly not a rounding error. 58,000 is the staggering, estimated number of people who die every single year from snake bites in India alone. It's a massive, ongoing public health crisis. And behind a huge portion of those fatalities, one primary suspect. Today, we're opening the case file on one of the natural world's most notorious and, honestly, most misunderstood predators.
Welcome to This Explainer. I am so thrilled you're tuning in, because today we're unraveling the spectacular saga. We're going to demystify India's deadliest suspect, the Indian spectacled cobra. Basically, we're acting as biological detectives today, digging into some truly groundbreaking new genetic research that completely rewrites what we thought we knew about this iconic animal. Seriously, it's a crazy story full of ancient migrations, deceptive appearances, and a deep scientific mystery that has finally been cracked.
All right, Section 1. Meet the spectacled cobra, the prime suspect. Let's get right into who we're actually dealing with here. So to set the stage, India is an absolute hotspot for reptilian biodiversity. We're talking over 350 distinct snake species across the country. But here's the thing. Out of those hundreds of snakes, only about 50 are actually clinically relevant to humans. And if we narrow that down even further, we get to the infamous Big Four. These are the four specific species collectively responsible for the vast majority of those 58,000 fatalities we just talked about. And the spectacled cobra, or Naja if we're being scientific, well, it is a highly prominent, very lethal, card-carrying member of that deadly quartet.
But tracking this specific suspect? It is not easy, because it is an absolute master of disguise. As a generalist species distributed across nearly the entire country, the spectacled cobra adapts to an incredibly diverse range of ecologies. And because of this, it exhibits wild geographic variation. I mean, a cobra in the north might look completely different from one in the south. We're talking different body colors, different physical patterns, even different markings on their iconic hoods. But, and here's the scary part, it's not just their wardrobe that changes. The actual chemical makeup of their venom drastically varies across the subcontinent too. This animal is literally a shapeshifter, making it incredibly difficult for scientists to pin down. Which naturally brings us to Section 2, a deadly knowledge gap, the missing file.
Okay, the stark, almost unbelievable irony of our scientific knowledge base here is just staggering. On the one hand, we know exactly what this snake does, right? It kills thousands of people, and its venom is this shifting, complex cocktail that changes depending on where you are in the country. But on the other hand, its evolutionary history, its phylogenetic diversity, its biogeographical origins, all of that has remained almost a complete blank slate. Think about that for a second. We've been fighting this incredibly lethal adversary without actually knowing its origin story or its foundational genetic makeup. Up until this recent study, the spectacled cobra was practically a ghost in the genetic record. You might be wondering, why the missing file? How does that happen? Well, the researchers point directly to the culprit. They note the, quote, persistent challenges associated with obtaining research permits and biological samples for Indian snakes. Basically, bureaucratic red tape. Because of this, most prior molecular studies on this cobra actually had to rely on samples from neighboring countries like Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. They had barely any representation from India itself. It's wild. The country that makes up the vast majority of the snake's range, and honestly suffers the absolute most from its bite, had almost no actual data in the system. But that is exactly where our breakthrough investigation begins. Scientists finally managed to secure the access they so desperately needed. They sourced biological samples from 67 different Naja individuals, perfectly spanning the major biogeographical regions of the Indian subcontinent. And they didn't just look at one tiny part of the DNA either. They sequenced 9 different genetic markers. That's 5 mitochondrial and 4 nuclear. Make no mistake, this was a massive, meticulous undertaking with one clear goal: to finally reconstruct the spectacled cobra's phylogeographic history and crack its genetic code once and for all. Moving on to Section 3, Tracing the Cobra's Roots, an Intercontinental Journey. It's time to look back into deep time. Let's see how this evolutionary journey actually builds over a historical timeline. By looking at the DNA, the researchers could finally trace the ancestral footsteps of our deadly suspect. And the very first huge revelation? The Naja genus didn't originate in India at all. Nope. The data actually supports an African origin for these cobras, millions of years ago. From Africa, during the Miocene epoch, which was a period characterized by shifting climates and emerging land bridges, the ancestors of our spectacled cobra made this epic dispersal event right into South Asia. Fast forward to the present day, and they have successfully conquered and spread across the entire Indian subcontinent.
All right, now for the big reveal. Section 4. One giant Indian family. The DNA a twist. This is where our biological detective story takes a turn literally nobody fully expected.
To fully appreciate this twist, we need to quickly define a crucial scientific term used throughout the study: panmictic. A panmictic species is essentially a single, randomly interbreeding population with absolutely no geographic barriers or genetic subdivisions. Think of it like one massive, sprawling family reunion without any borders whatsoever. Everyone is just mingling with everyone else in the gene pool.
And the data brilliantly illustrates exactly what I mean here. Check out the genetic mapping and haplotype networks on screen. Look at that pie chart right in the middle representing the CMOS haplotypes. See all those different colors? Those represent completely different regions across India. But look at how they all mash perfectly together into that massive central node. The DNA from a cobra in Goa is fundamentally intertwined with the DNA from a cobra way over in West Bengal or Maharashtra. Unlike so many widely distributed snakes that eventually branch off into isolated genetic subgroups over time, the mainland Indian spectacled cobra shows zero evidence of phylogeographic subdivision. Despite the massive geographic distances, they are one completely panmictic mainland species.
So what does this mean? The DNA entirely debunks the disguise. Remember how we said earlier that they look completely different depending on where they live? Well, it turns out looks can be highly deceiving. Back in the mid-1900s, scientists actually proposed that there were 5 distinct subspecies of this cobra in India, strictly based on those varying hood markings and colors. But this brand new genetic data conclusively proves that theory wrong. They aren't different subspecies at all. They're genetically the exact same unified family, they're just wearing different, localized disguises.
Except, of course, there is one major exception. Section 5. The Sri Lankan outlier, the island enigma.
Because just when you think you have a suspect totally figured out, they throw you a curveball. While the entire mainland of India forms this one giant, happy, interbreeding genetic family, the cobras just off the southern coast tell a completely different story. The data reveals that the Sri Lankan Naja forms a completely genetically distinct clade, entirely separate from the mainland populations. The ocean barrier of the Palk Strait did what thousands of miles of Indian mainland couldn't do. It isolated them just enough to forge a distinct evolutionary path, officially breaking the mainland mold.
So let's bring it all home. Why does cracking this genetic code actually matter to you and me? First, it clearly proves that you can't just sample a few snakes from the edges of a country and assume you understand the whole population. Broad, distribution-wide sampling is absolutely vital. Second, it demystifies how genetic variation works, or, in the case of mainland India, how it doesn't work. But most importantly, it brings us full circle right back to those 58,000 fatalities. If the mainland cobras are genetically identical, yet their venom is chemically completely different from region to region, that means the venom variation is likely driven by local ecological factors and diet, not deep evolutionary divisions. Understanding this distinction is absolutely crucial for developing highly effective, region-specific antivenoms and snakebite treatments to actually save lives.
Well, we've officially closed the file on the spectacled cobra today, revealing an incredible African origin, a panmictic mainland empire, and a truly deceptive mastery of local disguise. But it leaves us with a fascinating and maybe slightly unsettling thought to wrap up this explainer. If a single, heavily studied snake species can hide so many profound genetic secrets from us for so long, what else is hiding out there in the DNA of our deadliest neighbors? Thank you so much for exploring the data with me today. Keep asking questions, stay curious, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.